Welcome to the Everybody Eats podcast. I am on a mission to get you to think more deeply about where your food comes from. Have you ever shaken the hand of the farmer that feeds you? Today I speak with Elias Martinez. He is the CEO and founder of Kubed Root and If Kids. He is also on the Food Policy Council, and he is a part of the Urban Farm Day Committee. Today we talk about his journey through agriculture and what led him to start his businesses. We wrap up with a large picture discussion about the food system in general and how Elias sees his businesses fitting into the future of food production. Enjoy. Thanks, Elias, for coming on the podcast today. I'm excited to have you here as my first guest.
Thank you. Honored to be here. I appreciate it.
So I want to get right down into it. I want to know about your personal journey and what brought you into now working in the local farming community here in Buffalo.
Sure. So my personal journey with urban agriculture actually started when I was a young child. My mother, she was diagnosed with lupus, which is like an autoimmune disease which can eat up your organs. And my grandfather thought it had something to do with the food that she was eating. So he ended up creating a small little garden for her. The thing about that was that we lived in Opelika, which is like a small, or the kind of the roughest parts of Miami. And there wasn't really much space. It was buildings and projects all around us. And we were one of the only people to have land there. And he built her out this garden, and we were getting picked on and we were getting bullied by all the neighbors. My mother, she grew the vegetables and strawberries and everything that she had there, and she ended up taking it to the neighbors, and that kind of ended up starting a friendship between the neighbors. It kind of lasted for a really long time, even like beyond the time that she passed away. And that was my first introduction to urban agriculture and kind of the power it has in being able to mend relationships through agriculture. From there, we ended up moving to the Redlands, which is kind of like a swampy area of Dade County, kind of like the Everglades, most people know it as. And it wasn't much of a farm. It was a lot of space, but we just had a lot of like chickens and fruits and vegetables, mostly for self-consumption. And that was kind of the extent of agriculture that I experienced that I had as a young child. After that, I joined into the Navy, got into cooking, went to different countries, and we always brought on fresh fruits and vegetables from different countries. I always thought that was pretty cool. It was pretty local as far as like as much as it could be. So that was really interesting. As I was serving in San Diego, there was this kind of like a hobby shop for repairing cars that I really took interest in because it allowed people to be able to save money in car repairs by giving them car stalls and tools and everything to fix their vehicles without having to spend all this money. So it was kind of like a shared space, like a shared mechanic space. And I thought that was really cool. And I was like, oh, wow, that should exist out in the real world. And the whole sharing concept, I thought that was really neat and thought it could apply to other avenues like agriculture and things like that. So that really always stuck in my mind. And so after that, I got out of the military and I ended up years later in this really boring job and really didn't like it too much. I just got bored. I started listening to podcasts, and then I ended up coming across a podcast about sprouts and microgreens and how beneficial they were and how healthy they were. I was living a very sedentary lifestyle. I was just sitting down all the time, getting overweight, and I was like, I need to get healthier. So I decided to go buy some sprouts and microgreens and just found them to be really expensive. I couldn't really afford them at that moment, at least the amount that required having a healthy living. I'm usually pretty cheap and pretty resourceful. So I was like, okay, let me just see what I can do about growing my own microgreens.
Yeah. And
started experimenting through it, tried broccoli, and then I got radishes, and then kind of just started accumulating all the different types of seeds that I started buying. And next thing I knew, I had more microgreens than I could actually eat. And I was like, well, I saw how expensive they were. What if I can start selling them and actually make money with it? I was actually growing them in a 10 foot by 10 foot base room in our basement. Just had a bunch of shelves and flats, and I just started growing as many microgreens as I could. And then kind of just hit the ground running, going to farmers markets, approaching restaurants, doing cold calling, and asking them if they wanted to sell microgreens. or buy microgreens. I actually started going through retail stores and selling through them as well. And I learned a lot about the business of, at least a distribution business of agriculture or farming. And I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of how it works. As I started to get more and more business, I couldn't fit any more microgreens in my space. It just got to a point where I was just having things stacked on top of each other and I wasn't able to scale. So that's kind of where I was like, okay, well, what I need to do is get into another space, and found that to be really expensive. I was like, well, I wish a place existed where I can just kind of bring all my stuff into and start kind of growing what I need to grow, but scaling up little by little. So I always thought maybe I could go into like a storage unit and then get more storage units as I needed as I started expanding, but they didn't have any of the utilities I needed, like water, or constant access to electricity. That's kind of where the idea of Kubed Roots came along. Where I was like, oh, what if there was a space where people can come in, do all this stuff, everything's kind of built up, and they can scale as they needed. Kubed Root started as kind of like an indoor microgreenery in our basement and kind of scaled up. At the same time, the idea of having a shared growing space, that idea started starting to take form.
I love that, because that's where we first met. Is I was actually looking for a new job. I was working at a nursery at the time. But I thought, oh, microgreens is a kind of up and coming thing. I wonder what it would be like to work for one of them. So I was just looking for local microgreens places on Google, and I reached out to 3 or 4 of them, and you were the only one who got back to me, and very quickly too. We scheduled just a meetup, and I got to see the space, and I was really just intrigued by this idea. It's funny, I'm thinking of your second location, and I just remembered you actually had a first location in another spot. So, and now you're at a completely new location.
It's a long story, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit, your ups and downs and the challenges along the way. But that's great that you came across that idea. And how is this similar to co-working spaces like WeWork?
It's your traditional co-working space. You get a desk or an office space that they rent out to you, and then you have access to all the amenities that they have on site. So things like printers and small kitchens, access to Wi-Fi, anything that you may need to have a pretty well-run kind of office space. They provide all that to you at a flat rate. And the price is distributed amongst all the members within the co-working space. So I've always been a fan of co-working spaces, and I was like, oh wow, if this is going to be kind of like an indoor community garden, then we should start applying like a co-working space approach to it, where people have a space where they can grow, a little greenhouse. It's outfitted with whatever they need, and that's the office, if you want to call it. And they have access to all the amenities and services that you would need for an indoor farm. So things like processing station, cooling station, storage, Wi-Fi as well, sinks, things like that usually end up costing thousands of dollars to set up just starting out. But if you can come to our space, then for a flat rate, you can get all that pretty cheaply.
Nice. Now, I wanted to ask you, what were the biggest challenges to starting an indoor farm space?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges was money. Like with any other business that you're starting up, you kind of need that money. You need the capital. I was getting business through all the other microgreens, but it wasn't really a lot of money. It was maybe I was getting maybe an extra $600 a month. It really wasn't a lot for me to kind of justify jumping into full-fledged warehouse or being able to afford getting into year-long lease agreements and utility bills and setting up the infrastructure. Something like that would typically cost about $5,000 to $10,000, just kind of getting yourself set up. So really finding money was kind of one of the challenges in starting an indoor growing space. And that's where I was like, well, maybe if I'm going through it and I know other people have gone through it, then maybe I could create a business solution that answers to that. So to other people that want to get involved with indoor agriculture that don't necessarily have the funds to do it, they could start off cheaply and kind of build their way up until they're able to move out on their own and actually do that. So getting money was one of the biggest challenges in in starting an indoor farm.
So how did you address those? Did you go after investors? Did you try to raise your own funds?
Yeah, I approached investors. I was too early and the concept was too foreign and novel and brand new. So they really didn't understand it or believe in it too much. They love the idea. Here in Buffalo, they're a bit more reserved as to how they spend their capital. They like to focus on things that they know, and that's understandable. But the way that I ended up funding was just funding everything through the microgreen sales. So microgreens is my side job. I was doing the office job, and on the weekends go to farmers markets, and then whenever I could take the produce, the rest of the microgreens, to the restaurants and things like that. So just trying to build my own money, just bootstrapping everything.
So this was really a grind for you.
Yeah, it was. Still is. Yeah, it still is. And at first it was really difficult. And then even just trying to find the perfect space where it's like an open floor plan, small warehouse that's within the city of Buffalo that's not decrepit. Those were kind of challenging to find, but I managed to get really lucky in finding the spaces that I actually found.
So say Kubed Root is widely adopted. What are some of the sustainability benefits to that model? How does it reduce some of the impacts that you get from traditional farming operations?
The way that I see Kubed Root operating, once we start kind of actually ramping up, our focus has always been to be centered within hub zones or kind of areas that are food deserts, which are traditionally lower income areas. And then traditionally, unfortunately, a lot of those areas have older warehouses that are usually a little bit more affordable. And the way that I see us being able to engage in that sustainability endeavor is by us having the space, having us refurbish it. So we would be bringing life back to old buildings within neighborhoods that might be blighted. And once we get a bunch of farmers within that location, we would be able to essentially eliminate food deserts because we would have farms within these areas that can provide food to the community, or people that live there can actually come and start farming and start a career through that method and have side jobs that they could actually engage with. And of course, cutting down on the carbon footprint of the produce that they receive, because it would be a hyper local sort of setup where everybody in the neighborhood, that's where they buy their produce and they don't have to depend on it getting trucked in from miles and miles away. It would be something that's extremely close to them.
I know you've ran into some logistical issues at Kubed Root, and that led you to the development of a software called Demeter. Mm-hmm. So why don't you talk a little bit about the impetus for Demeter and what it is?
Sure. And I appreciate you being so kind with calling it logistic. Plain and simple, I ran out of money. I couldn't break even. Everybody kind of loved it, but it was still something that we were just starting and kind of just trying to ramp up. So, and I ended up just running out of money, plain and simple. So we ended up having to shut down the location. The company was still alive. It was just, it was basically homeless. We didn't have a space to really work out of. And that's kind of what started have me kick off getting into the software development side of things. So I was like, well, what can we do to keep this business alive without killing it or getting into something completely different? One of the things that I struggled with was being able to manage the people that were on our space and collect payments and see what kind of resources they were using up. That was always a challenge. And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's something that we need to have. We need to have a software that would help me be able to manage all these spaces. And if I need something like this, then maybe other communal growing spaces need our software Demeter. Since we were operating kind of like a co-working space, with co-working spaces, they usually have software that they use in order to manage their spaces. So they're able to see who's coming in and out of their spaces, collect payments, see what the floor plan looks like and who's using what, when. And since we were operating kind of like a co-working space, that seemed like a natural sort of software to apply for something like what we were doing. The only thing was that most software that existed for co-working spaces didn't have a agricultural focus. So that's where I was like, okay, if we can build a co-working type of software that's specifically focused on agriculture, then we can use this for ourselves and also be able to license it out to community gardens, farm incubators, agricultural co-ops, farm schools, any place where there's like a cluster of farmers or growers within a location. Provide the landlord or the owner of the facility the ability to manage the people and resources and tools that are within that location. So that's really what started it. It was more of a necessity, and the fact that we didn't have a space to work out of, and you don't really need a space to work out of when you're getting into software. And one of the other things also was that a lot of investors, whenever I spoke to them about Kubed Root, one of their questions was, how are you going to scale? Because the profit margins were really slim in how I was operating. But with software, the profit margins are a little bit larger and you can actually scale a little bit faster and more wide. So that's really what's the impetus in forcing me to get a bit more serious into developing the software for communal growing spaces.
Cool. So where are you at now? Do you have like a prototype? I know you have people working on it. I know you're looking for people to work on it. Mm-hmm. So just go into where it's at, and then if you have a sort of timeline to when you could be able to actually license it out to other operations.
Yeah. So January has been really great. We have one of our first customers. It's a nonprofit called Home Beneath Our Feet, led by Dwight. Their mission is to have the youth within Buffalo to be able to engage with agriculture and to ground themselves. It's more of a therapeutic approach to urban agriculture with children. It's a great organization, but what they do is they build out a lot of community gardens. And they just bought a farm in East Aurora. And we've been speaking for about a good year now. And I told him about the software we're developing for communal growing spaces, and he fell in love with it because it answers all the problems that he has as far as like being able to maintain garden beds and maintain the community and communication throughout with everyone. And it also answers some of the problems he has with the farm he just bought, where they're still a small organization, but you need a lot of people to be able to get together and farm that land and provide a lot of food. The software answers a lot of those problems, and we are looking to onboard them at the end of the month and being introduced to the community, the rest of the community garden community here in Buffalo in around March. So we have our first customer. So far, that's them, Home Beneath Our Feet, and they're going to be our pilot beta testers and kind of tell us what is wrong with the software, what's right with it, kind of help us in being able to develop this in a real manner where it actually helps community garden organizers. So that's kind of where we're at. We have the MVP.
Explain what that is, because I don't even know.
Sure, sorry. The MVP is a minimum viable product. It's what you can put out that is able to work. Like you're trying to build a Ferrari, you get a cart with 4 wheels first and push someone down a hill, and then you figure out everything. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're the cart getting pushed down the hill.
Very early stages.
Very early stages.
But exciting that you have a first customer and someone who can kind of grow with you and kind of work out the bugs with. And I'm sure you'll get more and more as that goes, because we actually have quite a few local farming community operations here, which I love. Massachusetts Avenue Project. There is, I think, one called Five Loaves Farm in that area. I was honestly shocked to learn how many there were here compared to LA. It was starting to come up and there was some stuff there, but you just think for that area, that the amount of people and the amount of wasted space and sunshine, that they would be further along, but somehow they're not. And they also have the most food insecure children. So that's an issue that exists in almost every urban area, unfortunately. And that's a big reason why I got into this space and I wanted to learn more about it and get involved and then spread that information to other people, because that's most important to me. If we can get people to support these local farming operations, And it could just be as simple as going to your farmer's market. But I digress. So that's a great segue and transition into your other endeavor, your nonprofit, If Kids, which is teaching the younger generations alternative farming systems, but through the lens of STEM, science, technology,
engineering, and mathematics.
Thank you. I forgot the last two. So why don't you talk about the mission of If Kids and how you sort of designed that curriculum?
If Kids, so If is an acronym for indoor farming. So it's indoor farming for kids. When I was running Kubed Root in one of our first locations, we would host microgreen growing Mondays. I'd have people come in and teach them how to grow microgreens, and people would bring their children and be like, oh, can you show them anything else? Is this all you do? And that's kind of what started making me think, oh, maybe there's something out there for some sort of program or something for children to learn how to grow food indoors. And I found that there was nothing like that really that existed. There's organizations that are focused around urban farming. And a lot of that is usually focused on how food is grown or how healthy food is or the importance of getting involved with agriculture. And all those are extremely, extremely important and necessary. But what I found was that there was nothing really addressing the poverty issue, because while it's great to eat healthy and know where your food comes from, a lot of people's main concern right now is, how do I make money? How do I live? Where, what kind of a job can I get?
Or how do I even get food in general? They're not thinking about if it's good or not.
Exactly. Our motto is to have the kids of today create the tools and equipment for the farmers of tomorrow. So having kids build out these indoor or ag tech centric tools and mechanisms and equipment, they would be able to figure out how they can build out a hydroponic system in order for them to grow the food in the first place. By them being able to build up on their STEM skills, if they, for whatever reason in the future, decided that agriculture wasn't at least their passion, then at least they would have a STEM framework where they can spread out into anything else and make money that way. But I really wanted to focus on showing people that money can be made through agriculture. That's not just becoming a farmer. It's actually building out these tools and things that assist farmers in being able to produce as much food as possible.
What have been some of the most rewarding experiences so far with If Kids?
Oh my gosh. The most rewarding was the first program I did. So Dwight from Home Beneath Our Feet, he was one of our first pilot testers. He works with the Buffalo Creek Academy, and he invited us into the school. I created a see-through hydroponic system made out of clear acrylic tubes and acrylic boxes, and kind of just built a hydroponic system that you can kind of just see the mechanism working.
Quickly, just explain what hydroponics is.
Sure. So hydroponics is the method of growing food using water. It's been around for thousands of years, basically.
But just water. There's no soil.
Exactly. Just water and nutrients. That's how, so hydro is, I think, the Greek word for water, and ponics is the Greek word for works. So I think it's like water works or something of that nature. My Latin isn't all that well, or Greek isn't all that good, but from my research, that's what it means. But it's just being able to make the water work to create your food.
Okay, got it. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clear that up for anyone who may not know. So you were saying about Buffalo Creek Academy and setting up hydroponics there.
Yes. So I had that clear hydroponic system, vertical hydroponic tower system working, and had the kids, I taught the kids about hydroponics and showed them all the components that go to it, like a pump and the tubing or the emitters. I brought all that, taught them about, how much the measurements need to be precise. And they took down notes. I gave them folders and everything. And they were just amazed. They were looking at it like they've never seen anything like that before. I had never seen anything like that before when I was a young child. To be able to expose them to a new method of growing food and a new way to kind of create something that they've never seen before.
How old were they?
They were like 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were 8 or 9 years old, and they were just enthralled with it. They were asking questions. I was answering them. They were really well behaved. And then at the end of it, one kid came up to me and unprompted just said, "Thank you so much. I really love this. It was really cool." I was like, "Oh my God, thank you." Like, I just, I didn't really go in it with the thinking that I was going to get thanked by a child. And that was really fulfilling. If I had to answer that, it would be that. But I had many fulfilling moments.
Yeah. I mean, that for me, that warmed my heart because similar for me, I want to get younger kids involved. So my experience doing that was with my fiance's nieces and nephew. I had them plant seeds, and then I had them come back a couple months later to see what had grown, and then they got to harvest and eat it right there.
Very cool.
And they got to pick flowers, marigolds that they grew. So that's like a fulfilling to me, but I still want to get more of this information out. But I love getting the kids involved, and then I love seeing 9 and 10-year-olds interact with technology that way instead of with iPads.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. Just being able to get hands-on and do that engineering. I don't want to say unfortunately, but we will end up getting into like coding and things like that and robotics because that's kind of where the world is right now. So they might end up having if they're going to have their face into an iPad, at least hopefully it's to learn how to grow food.
So how does teaching kids about alternative farming systems kind of shape the way that they understand food and agriculture?
That's such a heavy question. So, because most kids at that age don't even know where their food comes from. Like just point blank, even without alternative methods, they don't even know the traditional way. They don't know that their strawberries come out through the center of a flower. They just think it's popped into a plastic thing and they buy it at the store and that's it. So the concept of where the food comes from for a child is completely foreign unless you unless you live that life, unless you live, where your parents are growing food or you live on a farm or something like that. If you're in an urban setting, you really don't even know where your food comes from as a child, unless you're involved with that. But they still have that knowledge that it comes from a farm. They know that maybe they have this idea that there's a big red barn, green stuff all around, and cows and fields of things, and kind of your concept of, old MacDonald had a farm sort of stuff. So that's kind of where their idea of what a farm and food comes from, which is not completely out of line, but that's all they know. So when you tell them, well, no, you can actually grow food inside. You can grow food through these systems that you can build yourself. I think that's really mind-blowing for them because they're like, oh, you can grow food indoors? You can grow food on these big bins and shelves? And that's really, that I think that shifts their thinking about where food comes from, and it probably gives them a little bit more pause when they go to the store and try, and maybe even try to educate their parents, because even a lot of grown-ups don't know alternative methods of food growing.
Yeah, I think for me, I had some concept at that age. We also had a garden in our lawn somewhere, just like green beans and squash and lettuce, nothing crazy. And I honestly saw it as work back then. Mm-hmm. But now that I look back and see the importance of it, but I think it's important to get kids kind of more hands-on involved with seeing where food can come from locally, rather than maybe it's just coming from the grocery store, like if you're doing box meals or whatever. I will get into further stuff about food choices in other episodes. But that's great about If Kids. And I guess if someone listening has a kid in that age range, or maybe you do other age range classes, how does a parent get their child involved with If Kids?
Right now, we are stuck here in Buffalo, or kind of in the Western New York area. We are looking to hopefully expand soon. That's always the hope. But if they're in the Western New York, Buffalo area, they can contact us. Go to our website at ifkids.org and send us an email. We're going to start working on hosting kind of like monthly kind of classes and try to figure it out a little bit more. So if they want to get their kids involved with anything If Kids, they can send us an email, give us a call, and we'll try to figure out a way to make it work, because we are also looking into maybe doing like at-home workshops if that's something that they prefer to do. That's something that we're completely open to experimenting with.
Awesome. So I don't know if you have any other final thoughts on If Kids or Kubed Root, but if not, we can kind of wrap it up and get into our final thoughts here.
Sure.
When I last saw your new Kubed Root space close to me on Seneca Street, the community farm growing idea is kind of on the back burner. At least it wouldn't really work in that space.
No.
But you have access to more space outdoors,
yes,
which is a whole nother realm that I'm more tapped into. I have just a small little 5x7 raised bed in my front lawn. But when you gave me a tour of your new space, I was getting really excited because of the opportunity and the vision that you have for that area. So why don't we just talk a little bit about what you see for your new space and kind of what you're excited about this year as we approach growing season outside.
Yes. So unless you live under a rock, you will know that Buffalo is one of the coldest places in the country. We can really only grow anything about 6 months out of the year. And that's really one of the other reasons I started growing in my basement, the microgreens and everything, is because it was too cold outside and in the garage to do anything. So we have a new space in South Buffalo, and it's sort of a small kind of retail space, but it has enough space for us to start growing microgreens again and hosting classes and also hosting the nonprofit out of it. And we have access to about, I would say, probably about 6,000 to 8,000 square feet of backyard space. Also, we have access to about a 1/4 acre piece of land not too far from there. As we're approaching growing season, I'm getting really excited because there's people that are expressing interest in wanting to grow at our space.
Me included.
Yeah. So, and by us having all these partnerships, especially with like community garden organizations, that's going to be helpful in us trying to do some sort of planning back there so that we can accommodate the people in the area to be able for them to have their own grow space, similar to what we did with Kubed Root in the past, where it was more indoors, but of course it'd be outdoors. There are talks of enclosing the backyard in a large hoop house. That way it's semi-indoor, semi-outdoors. Yeah, there's a lot of excitement with that. We're looking at working with different organizations in order to clean up the area. With one of them being that's Goat Buffalo. They bring goats to do landscaping and eat up all the bad stuff and poop all over your yard. That's something that we're going to be working with once the snow kind of melts down, and then it'll be, spring and growing season, and actually have kids engage with agriculture outdoors instead of kind of in our little tiny space for now.
Awesome. And I think you also mentioned you could host like meditation or yoga classes or other mindful sort of events in the retail space.
Yeah. So we have a large enough storefront where we can have hosting of yoga or have other people teach classes and things there. Anything that kind of vibes with the ethos of being healthier and growing your own food and stuff like that.
Great. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. I want to talk about your ultimate vision of the future of food and how initiatives like Kubed Root and If Kids can fit into this more equitable and sustainable food future. I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. So one of the things I always tell people, and they sometimes think I'm crazy, but it's kind of the only way I can think, is that I see us going to the moon, going to Mars and stuff like that. So my whole thing is about creating communal growing spaces, having communities of people growing food for themselves and for profit. So in order to have a community in, let's say, Mars or whatever, you're going to need farmers out there growing food. You're going to need something growing food. I envision us getting out there where we were able to assist in building those communities in the other planetary spaces. But that's a crazy answer. So I'll pare it back a little bit.
Come back down to earth.
Again, let's come back down to earth. I envision our software being able to carry most of the weight in order for us to start creating communal growing spaces, more indoor growing spaces. So through the sales and licensing of the software, we'd be able to get into locations and have it subsidize the growing spaces. Because since the profit margins are so thin, if we can shove a little money over that way and kind of make it viable for each location where it's at, I envision us being able to get into a lot of states, a lot of cities that have food deserts. And that's really where I want to get into, is really getting into food deserts and disrupting those food deserts. The way that I see that tying in with If Kids is, since our company has such a focus on the future and how food is grown, and in order to grow food indoors requires a lot of technology and foresight. With If Kids, if we can foster that curiosity and that passion for agriculture and technology, then we would be bringing up a new crop of workers that actually know what they're doing. Once they get to that level where they can go into the workforce, they can start building out their own shipping containers instead of buying one for $200,000, whatever it is now. If they get a group of them together, they could create a shipping container with all of their combined knowledge for a few $1,000s. And being able to have them help their own communities, and even maybe building out their own indoor growing spaces, if that's what they see fit. So it's basically that, just having the children really get educated in ag tech and folding them over into what Kubed Root is doing and helping us grow through that.
Amazing. I feel like everyone has a propensity to be attracted to nature and want to work with nature. We've just become so disconnected from that through technology, which is great. But at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword, and we can fall too far into that spectrum. So I kind of love how you're finding a way to blend the two, where it's not just all tech or all nature, but in fact, it's both of them kind of living together and working together in a nice symbiotic relationship. Mm-hmm. Because we kind of want to be the rulers of AI. We don't want it to be the other way around.
Yeah.
So to close, what can you say to listeners that want to support alternative food systems in their local communities? What can they do today? What can they do tomorrow? What can they do from a week from now?
What they can do today is going out and purchasing food from your local farmer. Give it a quick Google, indoor farm or urban farm. Most cities have them. It really depends, but really supporting your local farmers is huge. That's the way you can support.
The easiest way.
Quickest way. If you said, I want to support, this thing now, that's one way to do it. Or give them a bunch of money. If you're rich, fund them.
Where we choose to place our dollars and where we get our food is really kind of what decides what's going to continue.
Farmers need money, so either support them through buying their food or funding them in some way, if that's what really the path you want to go. So that's like the 2-day one. Next week or next year or whatever, getting involved in organizations that are advocating for urban farming or agriculture, period. There's 4-H programs for kids. There's food policy councils in some cities. You can try to start your own. If you can't find it, try to start your own. That's kind of been my motto, is if I can't find something, I try to create it, because that's the only way it's going to come about.
Yep, exactly. That is the impetus of this podcast. Just get this information out there to as many people as possible, young and old. They know about gardening. They had victory gardens in World War II. My thing is that I don't want it to take a world war to get us to start growing food locally. We just need to do it now, and we need to start building these parallel systems now and yesterday. And it's happening, but I and you, we just want to push on the gas and get it going more and more. So thank you so much, Elias, for being here, for your time and your insights. Why don't you let the listeners know where they can find more about Kubed Root and If Kids?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. To find more information about Kubed Root, so I have to tell everybody it's Kubed Root with a K, Kubedroot. If you type in Kubed Root, that way you're going to find it. It's the same handle for Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, everything you can think of. It's at Kubedroot. You can send us an email. I'm always open to talk, connect with people and collaborate and discuss ideas. Completely open to that. For If Kids, all of our handles are IFKIDS.org. So ifkids.org. You can find us in everything like that. Our website is www.ifkids.org. And for Kubed Root, it's www.kubedroot.com.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone that you might think will enjoy it too.